Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Philippe. I work as a digital change coach and systemic coach, and I work with Manal.
Hi, I'm Manal. I'm the product manager at Deutsche Bank.
Thank you. And today we'll get you through some of our experiences of actually developing people and what we call bringing the leadership to the people. And it's in support of agility, how we actually develop excellence and operational excellence and an alignment of the people to that. And as well as we involve the people in the strategy. And it's part of our journey. So, that picture of the leadership being actually the reflection of the culture in a sense. Without further ado, getting things right back to the fundamental principles is every business is actually a digital business or will become a digital business or is already a digital business. And if you don't believe this, you can look at your kids and what do they do? They are the future customers, they are the future colleagues, and the workplace is going to be more digital. And that means, how are we getting on with the transformation efforts around digital? And it's a bit of a meme meant as a joke here, but we've seen that a lot of efforts that the senior executives and so on have applied for many years in transformation. Actually, COVID-19 and the response that has been brought to this has accelerated change, and therefore it's possible. And if we look at the high level, what is a digital business, what it should look like, we have a balanced value chain, and that's Wardley maps, and you would have heard, from Simon Wardley himself in the keynote. If we do a map of the business, we look at the business, we look at the needs, and the business has needs to invent the future, which is more the Genesis end, which is more the sort of innovation end of it. A need to get new clients, a need to make money and save cost. And of course, there's also a need for talents, but we haven't represented it here. And supporting this is actually a value chain of being able to do experimentation, driving sales and marketing, driving new products, developing a digital business, digital competencies that support that business, and then looking at industrializing the rest of the value chains around the infrastructure, the data, and so on. And over time, the experimentation get productized, and the products, get scaled, and things over time get more commoditized or industrialized. And what that means, and what we see in the challenge of transformation is very often that chain is unbalanced. There is still a lot of things that we do custom built. There is still an element of the value chain that is novel and too novel, that should be more industrialized. And we spend a lot of time on that. And that time we spend on it is times we don't spend on inventing the business and working in ambiguity and complexity of developing the business. And also, the digital business is not so connected to the existing product. And that connection is somehow missing. And what we see around the competencies, a lot of consultants would say how we should do things, but it's about the company to really acquiring that knowledge. So if we look at what the effort and what sort of attention should be on is looking at, we have execution challenges, and that's around cost. And by recovering from them, we can actually unleash an innovation and a growth that might have been stalled. And at the center of that, we can also look at there's been command and control management in a way in many organizations, and how that needs to evolve to enable better execution and unleashing innovation. And from that, if we look at what that means in terms of playing with that Wardley map, is reconnecting product and the digital business, industrializing some of the chain, And it's around digital change, it's around agility, it's around enabling agility, it's around DevOps and engineering quality, and freeing up some time for the digital innovation and agility. And that's what we are embarking on. That's what we're trying to make happen. And that means, looking back at this balance, it means, driving an operational excellence in the execution and really an effort around that, driving the strategic alignment plus the emergence, enabling the emergence around strategy. What we do, how does it emerge something different? And that is enabled at the center, at the core of how we're working through a systemic leadership. So a leadership that works across the system, a leadership that works with the system, and by systems we mean the human system of work. Digital is actually a team sport, and it's about people. So enabling that part to then serve that balance of operational excellence and executing the strategy and developing the strategy at the same time. So what we've done for this, and those are the base principles, that's why I'm explaining them, and Manal is going to jump in the rest, really, to see what we've done and how we brought that to life in the real world of work. So what we started, we looked at the organization, and organization is typically has some elements of silos, some core functions, very much engineering working as a pool and serving delivery, and delivery having to jump through this, and that brings some coherence, because through planning and through organizing the work we bring some coherence, but there's also generally an execution challenge through delivery, and as well the product itself, because we're always in a delivery mode. The product kind of gets a little bit forgotten, and that's where Manal feels dearly, I'm sure. Do you want to tell us about the product element, Manal?
Yeah, I think one of the things that this sort of organization, it works okay. However, as the organization evolves and you start really focusing on product thinking and looking at more flow and objective flow, this becomes a problem, because from an engineering perspective, it's actually very much product and architecture that are doing a lot of the solutioning rather than the engineers themselves. And what we found was that in a lot of cases that the engineers themselves had disengaged from the organization and became more of a service model as opposed to a team engagement model.
And it's no surprise, because we are getting them to be really in an execution mode a lot of the time. And part of what we are looking at in aligning the organization is aligning the teams, aligning on the strategy and aligning on the excellence. And that's what we're going to walk you through. If we go to the next one, is structurally we had to think and see the organization differently. And people will talk about value streams, and we'll talk about value streams, but the idea is very much around understanding the product and what makes up the product, and how can we flow the value of the product all the time. And that meant for us pivoting into more value streams. That meant as well that the functions themselves did not become irrelevant suddenly. To all the coherence across the value streams, the functions have a role to play. And there is a primary alignment around the value stream, but there is an inbuilt secondary alignment around the function. And everybody belongs in both, effectively. And yeah, go ahead, Manal.
So I think it's really important at this stage to sort of explain something. We've been talking about redesigning the organization. As I said before, the model that was there before hadn't created the right engagement and sense of ownership with all of our teams. It was really concentrated on a handful. So what really led us to believe that we needed to do, so we were basically on the journey of looking at how to redesign and move into value streams. However, we merged with another team, which was almost at the same scale as we were already. And that created a sense of urgency, an urgency that said, how do we bring those two groups together and do something. Otherwise, if we didn't do anything, then we'd basically remain as two organization. And that wasn't the intent of the merger between the two groups. So I think one of the most important pieces is that, you know, although you can talk about it, sometimes those moments that create the sense of urgency helped us to accelerate the redesign of the organization itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of those two groups coming together as well was, you know, the applications and the intentions of bringing those things together. And indeed, you know, if you want to bring the software estate and system estate together, and computer system estate together, we need to think about how do we bring the teams together in order to enable that, where the applications don't matter so much anymore. It's what it delivers to the user, and that's what the value streams are about. And as you do with value streams, and you know, the interesting thing around maps as well, and we use some element of value chains for maps, is understanding the balance between what is the value streams and what potentially is the platform, and how do we want to play the platform. So we've done quite a lot of things on that, and one value stream is actually the platform value stream, although it's quite lightweight in what we're doing. And the intention is to bring the reuse together and the service models and things like that. Another element very interesting is, and an element that people don't necessarily talk about so much, is how operational excellence is a way to unify, it's a way to align, and a lot of efforts have been going on around creating an excellence around how we operate. So around, you know, how do we reduce debt? How do we address waste? How do we consolidate our ability to deliver with DevOps and drive production stability? Engineering also was probably less of a, you know, initially engineering is a capability to execute, but actually we thought, no, engineering has a space at the table. And how do we raise up the profile of engineering so that we actually get better quality, and the engineer themselves having a role to play, and also telling us, no, we're going too fast here. Actually, if we want quality, we need to do things in a certain way. And that, you know, by focusing on this as an alignment, we have actually seen a lot of improvements around the engineering capability and the quality that results.
I think it's also something to consider here. We talk about leadership's attention and focus on quality and becoming more quality focused. You know, leadership had very much been focused on the delivery because that's what we always did, and we almost lost sight of the quality aspect. And in fact, if we think about it from a business perspective, they really expected us to put the quality into the product, yet they didn't at the time actually enable the conditions, the right conditions to achieve the quality because of the pressure that they themselves were under, that then translated to pressure within the group. So once we pivoted at a product perspective and looking at the quality of the product, both leadership and the business also shifted, which had some great results in terms of the user experience at the end of it.
And that's actually what you're referring to, is actually the meaning of this slide that I forgot to explain. But you know, most of the stakeholders very often in digital, because it's not visible, they are blindfolded. They're trying to make decisions around quality blindfolded. And indeed, that's what we saw. And by bringing the engineers, you know, in the mix and starting to visualize elements of quality, we actually are allowed to make better decisions. And that's indeed what happened. And you know, from seeing different organizations, it's very interesting to see how the business now is questioning, yes, you're going to do this, but isn't it a bit too fast? Isn't it a bit too much? You know, are we going to get quality out of it? So there is that leadership attention and stakeholder attention to quality, and everybody tries to hold each other accountable and understand when we're pressing too much and the risk of that. Moving on to alignment around strategy, and that's something that is very interesting in the sense that we often talk about autonomy of teams, but that autonomy will only really happen if they make good decisions, not perfect decisions all the time, but good decisions with what they know. And we need to improve what they know so they can actually make those decisions. And that means bringing people into the strategic context. And as part of bringing it, it also enables a better awareness. So, how much sort of continuous improvement do we need to focus on? And if really we have stability issues, we're going to focus on that more than we can do experimentation. And how can we regain that capability of experimenting over time? And we looked at value chains, which are used in maps to allow us to make sense of the users and the user needs, so we could align to that, and that was incremental in understanding how we would cut the value streams. And as well, the strategy process would try and tie up the ambitions to the execution, and we use something called the X matrix at different levels, so that every level works out their strategy, and their strategy contributes to the main strategy, and the main strategy contributes to their strategy. So it's very much of a feedback loop that exists. And of course, the strategy has to become more often more iterative, because we learn on the ground, and that elevates into the overall strategy, and then we refresh that. So we're very much in those cycles where fractal elements of the system, the human system, have been defined, where we work the strategy with them and where we cycle through that. And that's fascinating to work with engineers that were really developing things that now have to actually think about the strategy, and it's not natural. But it's fascinating when they start biting into it. It's fascinating to see suddenly their involvement, their engagement, is such a level above.
One thing to note here, I think that's really important, is that with that last bit around the coherence through the product or products, and it's product really that looks to bring everything together and keep that focus on the North Star and where to go. The product is effectively the umbrella where all the objectives and the outcomes are housed. And it's that enables those emergence of solutioning and the strategy levels that come through. Without that focus on what is the product, what are we doing for it, and where we're going, those solutions can be a little bit less coherent than without it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And moving on to the systemic relationship alignment. So it's our different part of the system, and when we choose to create value streams and distribute like this, the danger is that we suddenly, and many people will say, oh yeah, we yo-yo between different things. The danger is we lose basically ownership, and suddenly it becomes a bit chaotic. And what we are designing is aiming to keep that coherence around, and while distributing the responsibilities, we don't want to dilute the responsibilities. And the idea is starting with every team in the value streams have a leadership team, and that leadership team is made of representatives of all the functions. So prod, man, architecture, engineering, and everything is team-based as much as possible. We're designing things to be in collaboration with itself. So the team have a leadership team. The value streams have a leadership team. The representative of that becomes the virtual leadership team of the function, and we work out the relationship between the functions and the value stream, the value stream and other value streams, and actually the functions between themselves. And we look at developing those relationships towards the outcome that they have to bring for the system of work, so that the system is designed, in collaboration from the word go. And of course, that means, distributing that leadership, and that's something Manal felt really dear about.
Yeah, I think it's the bit where it says no leads to enablers. We debated absolutely long and hard over the terminology that we wanted to use in terms of the leadership group that sat against the functions. Are they a product lead and an engineering lead? And actually, it didn't feel right. If we wanted to create collaboration, it wasn't about having a head of something or another. But actually, the term enablers emerged from a lot of the conversations, because that's what we wanted the guys to be, the team to be, that leadership group, is enablers for the value streams, enablers for those functions that help others, help others achieve what they want, as well as achieving the goals of the organization. That in itself allowed us to distribute leadership without actually diluting it. And in a lot of cases, by removing the word lead and putting enabler in there, what we saw from the people actually who took on those elements, those roles, is that it created far more ownership and engagement, not just with them, but with the people around them. And I think that's a really important thing around language, and using the right language to create an intent.
And definitely the language as and the fact that this was considered, and why we explain it's an odd term, enablers, and we call each other out when somebody says lead, but the opportunity to explain why actually develops the people and develop that sense of ownership. And as we're progressing, we certainly not done, and we have quite a journey ahead still. And trying to put that slide together, there was always new things that popped to mind. And there's a lot of space traveled, and sometimes it feels like, oh, we're not progressing enough. But actually, when you turn around and you look, a lot of the things have been done. A lot of the things are enabling us to go further. And now, there's plenty of things around thinking in smaller, valuable increments, and the people are working on this, around expanding the relationship landscape, looking at growth agendas. So there's plenty of things like that. I think one of the interesting things as well are around thinking less in terms of projects and more in terms of product, and understanding we're building something that stays and it evolves. But how can we evolving? How can we redefine our perception of projects as evolutions of the product? And that is a big deal in large organizations. And we are thinking like that. Ingraining as well Kaizen and continuous improvement is one of the hardest things to do. And you never stop trying to improve like that. So it's another big one we're trying to do. And developing people is never also something you want to stop. It's exciting, and when you see all those people taking the ownership, it's actually very rewarding. So a lot still to go on, and I'm sure Manal, you'll be adding a lot more to that.
Yeah, definitely, lots to do and focus on.
And if we were to just conclude this presentation with one thing, it is actually that if we want to make, and that quote has been slightly changed because the original one wasn't quite perfect, but any person trustworthy in the system, we got to start by trusting them, and it's bringing that leadership to the people. And when we do that, we're seeing that and enabling them to lead and supporting them to lead, we see an emergence that happens. So the only way to make a person trustworthy, to trust them, to start by trusting them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.